mode.
Okay, just waiting for a couple of more attendees to join us and we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay. Good morning, afternoon or evening to everybody, depending on where you are joining us from. I'm Rodney Elder from Virtue Sales, and I would like to welcome you to this webinar. This session is a follow-up to a case study presented at Digital Book World, and I am joined today by Shane Hegarty, Head of Operations at Bonnier Zaf in the UK. One of the biggest challenges facing publishers today is how to manage data flow through the publishing house in an effective and efficient manner. Shane is going to discuss how they manage this using the joint application of Biblio Live from Virtue Sales and CoreSource from Ingram. Everyone is muted on this session, but please send through any questions you have during the webinar in the question box, and we'll endeavour to have those answered at the end of the session. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Shane. Can you hear me okay, Shane?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Rod. Thank you for the introduction.
No
just to read very quickly, hello everyone, and welcome wherever you're looking in from. I'll just get straight into it. So the agenda for this, just very quickly, I'll give you a snapshot of Bonnier Publishing and my own time here so you can determine whether or not I'm trustworthy. The background of our data from 5 years ago when I first joined the business, so you can see the problem that we were tackling and maybe compare it to your own situation. We'll look at some of the key reasons why we decided to change our approach, but I'm sure as I go through, many of them will be blatantly obvious. And we'll also look at what we implemented instead, and as you probably guessed, it has something to do with Virtue Sales, and as Rodney mentioned, also with Ingram CoreSource, who have been quite important recently. And last of all, I'll just look at the data lifecycle now as it relates to a specific title, Maestra, and just very quickly show what it looks like within the system for that particular title. So at Bonnier Zaffer, we grow stories, like I'm sure many of you do. And the Bonnier Zaffer company, or the Bonnier Publishing Company, is a family-owned business and is established since 1804. It's still run by the family across 7 generations now. There are about 8,000 employees across 14 countries, and it has a significant presence in every media type, and obviously relevant to myself is a very large book publishing arm. Just to quote one of our family founders, to be a book publisher, one must be both a capable and visionary businessman, as well as an educated man, a person who is both particularly knowledgeable and discerning in the literary field, with refined taste and literary sensibility. And I'm sure anyone listening who works in publishing can agree that that is 100% correct. So the Bonnier book structure is very quickly is very large. As you can see on the left, we've got the publishing arm, on the right, the retail. And highlighted in red, we've got Bonnier Publish, full stop because it didn't fit. That's the arm that I work for. And just to drill down Russian doll fashion, we've got the Bonnier Books team at the top running the entire business, and then the particular arms underneath with Bonnier Publishing there, Richard Johnson, our CEO. And there are about 2,400 of the 8,000 employees in the entire business who work just in the books area. Drilling down again to Bonnier Publishing, which encompasses the UK business here, we were about 460 plus employees, I think nearly 500 now. And we also have divisions in Australia, the United States, and France. So Bonnier Zaffer, where I work specifically, my little corner of the business, is about 40 employees located in central London. We're mainly trade fiction, 4 key imprints, about 120 titles a year. The two adult imprints are Zafir and 27, our two children's imprints, Piccadilly Press and Hotkey Books. And we have multiple cross-company projects with sister companies inside and outside of the UK. Just some examples you may or may not have heard of: Readers First, which is about getting reviews for books before they're published, and Manila, which is a joint venture translating German fiction. And a little bit about me, just so you can judge for yourself whether I'm to be trusted. I started off in academic publishing about 5.5 years ago in marketing and publicity. Then I tried editorial and production at Piccadilly Press. I was promoted to publishing manager for the children's imprints there at Templar. And then somebody at some point noticed I could look at a spreadsheet without getting a headache, so I was endeavored to become a business analyst at Bonnier Zafir, and then promoted to head of operations. So hopefully you can see I've worked across almost all areas of the business, and so I like to think I've got a pretty broad view of what a system like Biblio can accomplish. So just to give you a little background on how things were when I first joined the company 5 years ago, one of our imprints had an old FileMaker Pro database that was itself out of date even for FileMaker. Some of the others use spreadsheets as their sole database. I mean, that's a generous term to use. A lot of key info like address books were in people's actual physical notebooks or sitting in Excel documents or Word documents. We had filing cabinets full of unscanned documents and, more importantly, contracts, which is a disaster waiting to happen. And then there are just the bits of paper and things lying around the office which may be really important or they may not be, and most importantly, we had to hand create all of our scheduled sales sheets and documents, and then most importantly, as people were leaving the business, we were losing a huge amount of editorial knowledge because we didn't have a centralized database that someone could come in with relatively little training and just pick up where they had left off. So it's probably obvious, but some critical reasons for why we had to change. We had too many systems or a lack thereof. We had consistency of data or a lack thereof. Interdepartmental synergies or lack thereof. Operational scalability, serious lack thereof. Data security and integrity, total lack thereof. And huge amounts of waste and inefficiency and duplication and just general confusion about what was stored where and who was responsible for maintaining it. And when it comes to maintaining, there were endless amounts of filling in data and metadata spreadsheets, and as I've worked through the business, I was doing a lot of that personally, so I have a particular bug in my craw about that one. And on that note, just a metadata spreadsheet warning for anyone else out there who has had to suffer at the hands of filling in Amazon and similar spreadsheets. Just a quick flash, and I don't get an opportunity to be creative very often, so this is my collage of various ways we were storing. At the top there, our warehouse data. At the bottom, our Amazon data. In the middle, we've got some production scales. Just crazy amounts of info in really unstructured ways. So our escape route, which was settled on by people before I joined the business, but I'm still very happy they did, was VirtuSales BiblioLive publishing system. And the core modules that we use are the bibliographic and editorial, production, contracts and rights, royalty processing, and then my personal favorite, the data distribution, which handles sending out our Onyx feeds to multiple channels and retailers, including the add-on bit to this presentation, which is Ingram CoreSource, who are our main ebook distribution platform for distributing files, but also, more importantly, for data. So currently our data goes from Biblio to CoreSource in a nice clean way, and then CoreSource chop and change that data for the various retailers who we have direct and indirect relationships with. And the last part which we're working on now is sales aggregation, and that is CoreSource working on ways to automatically, as much as possible, gather sales data for reintegration into Biblio to feed back into the royalties module, and I'll talk about that in a second. So just to look at how Biblio actually takes data in and feeds it back out in the various locations that it's possible to send them to, and I'm sure we're probably not even using it to its full extent. We've got bibliographic and editorial, production, contracts, and royalties. All of these are being filled in by users at various levels. That results in finished product and metadata, hopefully. Website feeds are kind of a sideline that we use. We send XML feeds, and there are many other types you can send as well. And then more importantly, we send Onyx distribution to our retailers, our print retailers specifically, in this case Amazon and Nielsen being the two biggest, but also some others there that you'll recognize. We also have a feed that goes to our warehouse using an old standard called Vista, and that's with GBS, and that's recently we've got that working, and it's been fantastic. It takes so much pressure off of people to remember to put things out of print or check whether something has had the rights properly removed. And then the last part, the core source ebook file distribution, which I mentioned previously, sending to all of these various retailers who have weirdly different requirements for the Onyx data, even though it is technically a standard, and core source have made that much, much simpler than it used to be. And then the final piece, which I said is really more ambition at this point, which is sales aggregation and ingestion, reducing as much as possible those last few spreadsheets that are still being amalgamated by hand. So what we're looking for really, and what we're striving to get to is, and Rodney and Biblio suggested this name, is the perfect circle, and I like the name. And in the top right, you'll see we start with really a title acquisition using Biblio, moving through to production, entering our contracts and rights information, distributing that out as metadata to core source for ebook distribution, but also to our physical channels. And ideally then sales aggregation coming back in from core source for royalty processing in Biblio. Now that part on the left is to say the ambition bit, but as you can see it covers pretty much every area of the business, and it frees up a huge amount of time, which I'll just point to now. So some of the reasons that we selected Biblio specifically, there's a lot of competitors obviously. So we didn't have the resources at the time or even now for an IT team to develop or to manage or upgrade any system, and obviously that's handled by Biblio every 6 to 8 weeks. A big part of that that's useful to us is that development work being done for other publishers also benefits us and vice versa. So we're all on the same system and we're benefiting from each other's investment in that system. We've got full access to the system from US and Australia, and we can communicate with our colleagues via it. It's cloud-based. We have the ability to add new companies to Biblio using the existing setups, which I'll give an example of further down. It's a fully integrated system proven with market leaders, and that's really key for us. We've got to have stability, and we've got to know that the system has buy-in from big players, and obviously Hashhead, Penguin Random House, and these people doesn't really get any bigger. There's multi-currency management. We're an international business, and it's not good enough to have a system that works for the UK. It has to work everywhere, and so far, if it hasn't worked, VirtuSales have been keen to make sure it can, and it's rare now that we come across a case when we can't sell. And retaining and processing complex contract information. I mentioned earlier on all of those contracts that were sitting in filing cabinets. All of those now have been scanned and entered on the system. It's a very complex process, but once it's done, they're usable for multiple purposes and they're safe, and the data is structured as opposed to sitting in a PDF document which nobody will ever even open if we're looking. And then I mentioned, and obviously is the key point in this presentation, data distribution has saved a huge amount of time for me personally. So just to look at that from a data perspective, some return on investment benefits that we've seen. Some of these numbers are a little spurious because it's hard to quantify, but I've had personal interactions, so I'm confident in the spirit of them. So we've saved about 50% of our time processing and preparing royalty statements. To be honest, you could possibly even say 70 to 80% depending on how bad the system was before. We've set up Onyx feeds that we didn't have to interact with VirtuSales in order to create, which is huge because there are always retailers upgrading their systems, looking for new feeds, wanting to change things. We've got full access to that, and once it's complicated, but once you've got your head around it, you've got relative autonomy to set those up as you see fit. We've greatly improved the frequency and accuracy of our data as well. In the past, it's all well and good sending one perfectly accurate spreadsheet, but if you never update the titles, then you're really missing a huge opportunity. We're saving several hours a week managing the ebook distribution alone, which relates to that previous point of trying to keep things up to date, not just sending them out the first time. We've standardized and simplified an awful lot of our internal reporting. Things that used to be done by hand on a spreadsheet are now output from Biblio's very, I would say, very complete reporting system. You can report on pretty much any area of the system, and 99% of the time you can get the data you want back out in a spreadsheet or in a nice looking PDF or an HTML document. Just the last few points on this. So we're saving probably another 30 to 40% of our time making sales sheets. Now, obviously somebody still has to input that data into the system, but the difference is we're pulling in biography data from somewhere else where someone had to fill it in, or description data that someone had to put in for marketing reasons. And Biblio is turning that into a nice looking PDF document as opposed to somebody hand creating it in Word, believe it or not. About 50% of our time in preparing acquisition estimates, for a similar reason, they were done on spreadsheets before, and you've got someone sitting down putting in royalty rates or tweaking things. Now we've got lots of various templates in place, and editors themselves are able to get 90% of the acquisition done, and someone like myself steps in at the end just to finesse a few numbers or double check that it makes sense. And which I mentioned above and just wanted to emphasize, integrating new imprints or publishers or companies has been huge for us, as I mentioned earlier, with the fastest growing UK business in publishing, arguably. And we have to be able to adapt. And our most recent acquisition, John Blake, is very close now to being live on the system for royalties. We acquired them a few months ago. There were about 1,500 contracts, which was a huge amount of work, but through a combination of manual entry, data uploads with in-system tools, which are quite complete, and with ad hoc assistance from VirtuSales, who are very capable and aware that every publisher is slightly different and that sometimes you'll need a little bit of help. We've got them operating pretty much inside of our systems now within the space of probably 6 months, and that's with realistically maybe one full-time person and a couple of part-time people helping him out. And they were operating on the 5 years ago model. So once you've got the system up and running, it doesn't take years to get things done. In a couple of months, you can integrate someone into this much more advanced database. And so finally, just to run through a kind of practical example of how that looks for anyone who's never used the system or seen it before. Maestro, which was a huge title for us last year. So you've got at the top level of Biblio multiple editions and formats, and you can see here on your screen with Maestro, we've got trade paperbacks, hardbacks, paperbacks, signed copies. All of these various editions can store data that is relevant to them, or they can share data across the work where it's relevant and distribute that as relevant depending on which retailer needs what. It's all very modular and very adjustable depending on what we need, and this was a complicated example. Oh, and sorry, just to go back to that, if there's anyone listening who deals with co-editions, we don't do so much here, but our sister company is heavily involved in that, and there are extensive areas of the system for dealing with that type of model with multiple editions on single ISBNs. Looking at it from the user perspective, a lot of people who log in will see this. It's the editorial dashboard screen or marketing dashboard screen, which is adjustable at the user level currently, and I know VirtuSales are developing ways for a user to change their view on the fly. At the moment, you can click into these screens and in most fields edit them directly, as opposed to having to go to, for example, on the left, edit edition specification is a particular area on Biblio. And rather than the user having to go find that area, they can just click in here, change the field, and then go back to doing something more interesting. And that's just a closer view in case the other one was too small to see. There's a lot of detail. Then we've got our production, which is slightly more prosaic, but the impression level essentially. Every printing of the book has a record on Biblio, and you can see if you squint there's extensive amounts of detail relating to the costs, and this is where the P&L comes in. You know, you're estimating what your editorial and design costs might be, putting in production costs based on scales. Again, work that would have taken a lot of man hours is now relatively automated. And then contracts. I mentioned contracts earlier on are extremely complex, and here's just a quick snapshot of the summary page of a contract. This is from Maestro, which is a relatively simple contract actually, but you can get anything you want in there, and it deals with it in a fairly complete and user-friendly way, as much as is possible with things as complicated as contracts. And obviously that feeds through then automatically to determine our rights, where we've acquired those rights, and then we can log where we've sold those rights. And then more importantly, data distribution. I say importantly because selfishly this is my favorite bit. And Biblio is turning all of the information that users are entering in their day-to-day into, or restructuring it to be appropriate for Onyx, which is the principal standard. And the Onyx wizard, which is on the screen now, is a quick way for a user to see where those things relate to in the system. You can click on those fields, it'll bring you to that box so you can quickly fix it. And essentially what we're trying to do is turn this, which looks lovely and is for user-friendly, into that. which is what unfortunately retailers need. And although people like myself like to look at things like that, your general user wants what's on the left, they don't care about what's on the right, and Biblio is the intermediary to make sure they never have to look at it. And the last part really, which is the ambition again, we're distributing through CS at the top there. You can see some retailers failed. That's because we haven't sent them a price or we don't want to sell with them for some reason at the time. And on the bottom, the sales aggregation tool, CoreSource IQ, which will hopefully feed back into the Biblio system. And ultimately, we're trying to create royalty earnings. This is an overview of what that looks like, broken down, as you can see, earnings by edition, sub-rights income, in order to give our authors this, and hopefully it'll make them happy. And as you can see, it's a very clean royalty presentation, and I can't emphasize enough really, it's not my area, but my colleague says that this has saved him, he can't even estimate how much time it has saved him to be able to present this automatically to customers or to authors and agents in nice clean PDF formats as opposed to horrible spreadsheets like before. And that's it really. It's a whistle-stop tour of how we use Biblio to deal with our data lifecycle, and I've put my email on the screen. I'm very happy to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Shane. It's definitely not about needing to go for a long time to get a good message across. So appreciate your time in giving your account of the world of publishing and how to try and make it a little bit easier. And yeah, if anyone has any questions for Shane, please contact him directly, or if you would like to get in contact with myself, my details, rodney.elder@virtuesales.com, is also up there. So thank you everyone for attending. This has been recorded and we can make that available. All right, have a great day everyone, and thank you, Shane.
Thanks, Rodney.